He wanted to be the Steve Jobs of the submersible arena. Every time when a story was being started with oxygen, they would pump out another story. We heard some bangs on the hull, what is called a dead man's stick.
Just blown away by the whole premise. Yeah.
I mean, insane. This is the very first submersible accident in 60 years. Stockton was warned.
I haven't heard anyone say
he could do whatever the fuck he wanted. You need to also understand the psychology of the passengers, okay?
that wasn't the answer I was expecting.
That's what it was. Absolutely.
Whoa.
You're priced like a bootstrap startup. So they knew.
Today we're talking with Nik Halik, who famously voyaged in a submersible to have lunch on the bow of the shipwrecked Titanic. Nik is a global investor, philanthropist, and civilian astronaut. Now, we could talk for days about Nik's life, adventures, and achievements, and even exploits. But today, however, we're here to talk about the recent OceanGate submersible disaster on which 5 people tragically lost their lives. Nik, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Ben, how are you doing?
Yeah, well, thank you. Let's get straight to it. Tell us a little bit about your voyage in the submersible to the shipwrecked Titanic, how it came about, and what it was like.
Yeah, so I went down with the Shirshov Academy of Sciences in Kaliningrad. This was 2005 in July. In fact, last week when a disaster was basically unfolding, it was 18 years to the date that I actually went down, and I made 2 subsequent dives to 13,000 feet and basically explored the immortalized shipwreck, RMS Titanic. I spent literally almost 2 days. I spent about 20 hours down at the bottom, and I became the very first person since the actual sinking in 1912 to have lunch on the bow. So I actually went down with the Russians, and the Russian platform basically encompasses 2 submersibles, and they basically dive down at the exact same time. So basically, one, I was actually with my pilot, Victor Machetta. There was a 2 of us. And we have another submersible, which basically acts as a support vessel in the event of any emergency rescue, or let's say we've just been snagged on, some of the decking or the debris field, for example. So we have, very strict safety protocols. And I chose the Russian platform because obviously they were using a titanium hull, and we'll discuss, the OceanGate debacle, or should I say. But I went down. It was a pressurized biosphere. It was a titanium steel hull, and every 20 dives, that particular submersible always gets retrofitted, and then basically recertified, whatever kind of thing. So obviously, I did my due diligence, and I chose the Russian platform.
What sort of training and preparations required to go? Because I don't think a lot of people know that it's more than just a journey out on a boat and drop the submersible. It's an actual voyage. It's like an expedition, isn't it?
Yeah, basically, exactly. So it's about 400 miles east of St. John's, Newfoundland, which is the eastern cape of Canada, for example. So, and obviously you're in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, which is brutal. And around this time of the year, you got 10 to 20-foot swell, and this is favorable conditions. Usually, the North Atlantic Ocean, you've got hurricanes, you've got all sorts of storm squalls, what have you. So the submersible itself, I mean, you need to understand this type of dive, when you're diving about 13,000 feet, it's about 6,000 pounds worth of square inch of pressure, which is kind of like an elephant basically standing on your fucking pinky.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
So you're a crush depth in this particular regards, for example, because your eyes so deep. And things, and I'll give you another example, like the blue whale or the sperm whale, for example, over here, the deepest they can go is about 10,000 feet. You're at about 13,000 feet. No one's going to see.
Yeah.
There's at any given time, there's about 3 deep diving submersibles around the world, scattered around the world. Most are usually being retrofitted or just significant maintenance required, for example.
Would you say the Russians technology? Also, I think you mentioned to me once before that the Russians are the real leaders in most technology with adventure, like for instance space and deep sea exploration.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the Russians build very robust systems, and a lot of it doesn't really involve the bureaucracy that we have here in the United States. I mean, I live in the United States. I'm an American resident here, but the Russians have a different perspective, and I'll give a perfect example over here. In the 1960s, the Americans basically funded a particular project in relation to a pen that can write in 0 gravity. Okay. Americans spent $3 million devising a pen that can write in zero gravity. The Russians said, well, fuck that, let's just use a pencil.
That's
True
hilarious.
story, you know. It's so true. But you know, the Russians, yeah, look, I mean, they build robust systems, you know. I'm a private astronaut, you know, and I chose the Russian space platform, the
Mm.
Soyuz rocket, to rocket to outer space, for example, of you. Why? Because once again, it's their due diligence, and also the Russians have a very, um, you know, they do have a very unique record in relation to the safety.
Let's talk about, first of all, your connections with those on board. I think you said previously that you knew one or.
Correct. You know, there was two of the individuals over here, the other French guy and also the British guy.
Did you actually speak to your two friends who were on board the OceanGate before they went down?
No, but a good friend of mine did about 2 days before the incident. Basically, my friend Richard was at an event with them in the Azores, in the Indian Ocean, and basically said, you know, he was trying to convince them not to go on this
Oh,
particular
really?
submersible because of the dangers or whatever too. So, and 2 days later, the incident happened. In fact, I got a phone call from Richard, my good friend. It would have been about probably 5 a.m. Monday morning, and this is before the news broke out, you know. And he said, "Listen, we've got some bad news. There was they failed in their communication. Well, there was a communication breakdown. They lost all power to the submersible, and I got that phone call about 5 a.m. By 9:15, the BBC broke the story, and 10:30, CNN broke the story.
What was your initial reaction?
I already knew that it was basically a catastrophic failure in relation to the hull being compromised and basically imploding. Because
Right.
here's a couple of things. So there's multiple redundancies, okay, for them to get back to the surface. You know, in fact, they have 5 different redundancies. You know, one basically means they release all the weights to create more buoyancy, so they basically float to the surface, right? They can drop sand, or they can deploy the airbags, for example. You know, 'cause here's the thing: there's no tether, there's no chain. Basically, you open up the ballast tanks, you take on seawater, and you sink down to the bottom. So you either deploy airbags or you blow the air compressors to basically purge all the seawater, or you basically deploy sand, or you just drop your weights, you know, for buoyancy. None of those contingencies worked. In fact, if they all passed out, let's say the carbon dioxide scrubbers on board the hull didn't work, and they were poisoned by carbon dioxide, and they're all unconscious. Well, the pilot had what is called a dead man's stick, and a dead man's stick works like this. If you're unconscious, automatically you drop the dead man's stick, and then that basically deploys the redundancies and you gain buoyancy. Okay, so that's a normal thing. So, and basically the way it works is every 5 minutes, a command is sent, and you've got to basically say okay. You know, if you fail to click on okay, then that basically deploys the redundancies and you float back to the surface. Okay, none of those contingencies, none of those redundancies that actually worked. And at that particular point, since I lost power, since I lost communications, I knew at that particular point that it was a catastrophic implosion. And because they were using carbon fiber to reduce weight.
I want to talk about those materials and go into that material aspect. But as you're explaining what you're about to now, can you contrast that with the Russian Mir that you went down on, and those differences, not just in the materials but in the manufacturing processes?
Yeah, definitely. So basically what I was in a pressurized biosphere. It was a sphere, okay? So it was titanium steel, and we had a 7-inch acrylic thick porthole, for example, for basically viewing outside. In fact, we have
Right.
3 of those. The OceanGate submersible, called the Titan, changed the design of the actual hull, you know, and they chose to go more cylindrical but more long, okay? As opposed to a circular sphere, they went more like a rectangular sort of design. And they opted not to use titanium steel. Instead, they used carbon fiber. And obviously carbon fiber, we know that it's very strong. A lot of supercars,
Right.
hypercars today are basically built using you know, carbon fiber. But carbon fiber is not meant to be modulated and marinated into shape, for example, because it doesn't have that heat stress I mean, titanium steel can basically withstand very, very deep components of the ocean, for example, over here, So OceanGate, by building a lighter craft, which is hence carbon fiber, okay, their idea was, okay, if we build lighter, that means we can build a bigger submersible. A bigger submersible means we can fit more paying passengers at 250 grand a pop. Now, Ben, you're Australian, 250 grand US.
So are you saying that they did it to fit more people on to make more money? Like this, are you saying that this is
It was for profit greed.
a profit over safety
It was for
potentially?
profit. Like, absolutely.
Whoa.
So by building carbon fiber, it's lighter. If you can build lighter, you can build bigger. Okay, because titanium steel is very heavy. And the thing with titanium steel is you got to get it back to the surface. That's why you need a degree of buoyancy, for example, the weight. That's because each person, let's just say 200 pounds, okay?
I've listened to lots and lots of podcasts on YouTube. I've become a little bit obsessed with hearing all about it. I haven't heard anyone say
I'll tell you right now,
this.
that's what it was. It was a greed factor, meaning this, the pilot, Captain Rush, he was on board and he had 4 paying passengers at 250 grand USD. That's $1 million every dive. Now, 250 grand is about 335,000 Aussie dollars. So basically, okay, think of this, $1.3 million, 4 paying passengers. So you build you reduce the weight, you can make it bigger, which made bigger, you fit more paying passengers. So he was working out, okay, if I go out there for 5 days, we did 4 dives, I'm going to generate $5 million.
That's unbelievable, Nick. And one of my questions I had in the back of my mind as you're saying that, well, hang on a sec. If the mirrors were titanium, and how long they've been operating for a long time, 30 years?
Yeah, about 30 years. And they've been retrofitted a number of times. For example.
Wouldn't they just copy the successful system? Why did they have to go out of bounds?
This is the very first submersible accident in 60 years.
60.
Everyone's been using titanium steel hulls, a pressurized circular biosphere. But these guys say, you know what? Look, the issue was he didn't want to go the traditional route. He was very much a contrarian. He wanted to be the Steve Jobs of the submersible arena, the ecosystem, for example. And by using carbon fiber, he wanted to be the first guy to experiment with it. But here's the thing. It was an experimental submersible that was not certified or validated by any regulatory body. There was zero compliance.
I heard that they got briefed before they went down in the submersible. Did you do any sort of training over and above being just simply briefed when you went on board, or?
Well, with the Russians, obviously you get briefed. You're aware of the systems. You get to know the sub.
Yeah.
Basically, in the event that my pilot has a heart attack, I have to know how to basically bring it back to the surface, because there's no communication. There's radio communication with the surface, but they can't trigger anything. It's left to me in the event my pilot has a heart attack. Okay. These 4 main passengers had zero redundancies in relation to that. If Stockton Rush, the CEO of the pilot, if something had happened to him, I mean, these guys are stuck in a little sardine can and they're going to sink down to the very bottom of the ocean with 96 hours of oxygen, meaning they're going to die sooner by carbon dioxide poisoning than the depletion of all oxygen, for example, over here. So anyway, they weren't certified, zero regulations, and they were operating in international waters. There was no international body to regulate the dive.
Yeah.
That's why they were in international waters. He would not have dived in American waters because he'd be bound by the rules and specifications, for example.
Right.
So by diving in international waters, he could do whatever the fuck he wanted.
I'm just blown away by the whole premise that it was purely a money grab to increase profitability.
You're priced like a bootstrap startup, and on top of that, when you look at the illegalities of the dive and the lack of regulatory compliance, for example, over here, there was only one submersible. So in the event of danger or of any emergency type thing, there was no secondary vehicle to go down and help and assist.
Yeah,
I mean, it's insane. Look, I mean, he was bootstrapping it, so he needed paying passengers. You need to also understand the psychology of the passengers, okay? We have 2 billionaires and 2 multimillionaires, okay? Multimillionaires and billionaires, you would think, will be very, very diligent when it comes to the preservation of their own life, correct? But it's the It's the exact opposite. Because when you're a billionaire, you're far more indiscriminate with your spending.
Mm.
And you're also far more indiscriminate with the preservation of your own life because you're taking more risks. And billionaires are all like, for example, over here, like whether it's space or whether it's volcanoes or whether it's, diving to
Were
the
your
depths of the ocean.
friends on there billionaires?
Correct. So billionaires also have that their risk type personality. And another thing too, when you're in Explorers Club, you sort of come with a territory. You take risks because when you join the Explorers Club, you have to be voted in based on your
Right.
pursuits, based on what you've done. So if you haven't done anything daring, you ain't going to fucking
Yeah.
make it. It's like you need to summit Everest 3, 4, 5 times before they accept you in Explorers Club. So each member of the Explorers Club has achieved some really unique attributes.
Would they, obviously it would have just collapsed in on itself and they wouldn't have known a thing. But would there have been any sort of warning signs for them to go, oh, let's...
No, it would have happened in a millisecond. There would have been a couple of cracks and then bang.
Wow.
Yeah, in a millisecond. And basically instant evisceration, for example, over here. And look, so right now they did collect some wreckage of the actual Titan submersible, and it was about 600 meters from the wreck of the Titanic. So I'm sure they're going to be exploring that, and they're going to be doing a lot of stress tests on the different compounds, the different elements that was used to basically construct the actual Titan. And there'll be a lot of focused attention on the actual hull itself, for example. So they'll be able to determine in relation to what actually transpired. I got the phone call, and then a lot of media, radio, television were all basically interviewing me, and I said to them, listen, more than likely it was a catastrophic failure. The hull, the integrity of the hull was compromised and it imploded. But
Oh, so you predicted this?
I said it on Monday. In fact, I did a Twitter Spaces on Tuesday, the day after, and this is when CNN was basically running with the lower
Right.
third chyron, saying 75 hours left, 74. I mean, they were basically pumping as much oxygen into the story. In fact, I did a Twitter Spaces and we had 2.3 million listeners, and listening to my particular theory as to what transpired. And I said the following, just like I said to you, it was a catastrophic failure and it imploded.
Whoa.
And people were saying, how can you say that right now? Well, I mean, they're probably down at the bottom and they're down to their last 50 hours of oxygen. I go, there's less than 1% chance they're down at the bottom. And by the way, even if it's 50 hours of oxygen, they're going to die of carbon dioxide poisoning.
What did you think about how the emergency services and response, how that was handled?
Well, here's the thing. There's different levels of bureaucracy because when you're in international waters, who's responsible? And which country is going to basically do all they can? And then you look at, okay, so we had a French guy, we had a British guy, we had 2 Pakistanis, and we had the American. So the only American was the pilot, okay? But if there was an American passenger, the American government would have acted sooner.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Really illustrates the approach to expeditions that the Russians do, because, as you mentioned before, they've obviously got the Mir 1 and the Mir 2.
What one does is like one lights up the Titanic while you're basically exploring and documenting, for example, They are both down at the exact same time. But you got to ask yourself, like, who's gonna help you in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean? I mean, it's like which country's gonna spend hundreds of millions of dollars to rescue you? And the thing is, no one can rescue you when you're 13,000 feet deep. The resource is not there. That's the thing. It is such a dangerous pursuit. There is no one to save you if something goes wrong.
The more you're saying, the more it sounds very irresponsible for the media, or at least the government. They feed the media, I guess, to a point, but to give the families hope and to, as you say, give oxygen to that story.
Yeah,
that's really sad.
That every time when that story was being starved of oxygen, they would pump out another story. We heard some bangs on the hull, and it's like, look, the US Navy knew Monday morning that it imploded because they've got sonic booms, they've got acoustic they got sonic acoustic equipment, so they can track Russian
Yeah, right.
submersibles in the South Pacific, in the North Atlantic Ocean. Okay, there was an implosion at about 6:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, American time. So they knew, but you know what? They didn't inform anybody, and the media just ran with the story. And I'll tell you why. The American government knew Monday morning that there was an implosion.
Wow.
Okay, but you need to understand, why did the American government say nothing? Because the same week there was a lot of what? Whistleblowers, lots of diverting attention. You know, how do you create disinformation, for example? How do you divert the attention of eyeballs onto a different story when something else is unfolding? It's politics. It's geopolitical politics. Stories that are unfolding. A lot of politics. A lot of the divisiveness here in the United States, for example,
Yeah.
and sometimes you need a distraction. And I'll give you another example. The Chinese.
There's what's that saying? And I don't mean to trivialize something when your friend, two of your friends have perished, but they say don't let a good disaster go to waste.
Well, they're going to milk it, and the eyeballs were basically focused on how many hours were left. How many hours of oxygen, for example.
Yeah, that was. I mean, people all around the world. I know for me, I was like, really upset, like thinking about these people down there knocking on the side of the boat.
Really, are we going to rescue them? Are we going to extricate them, for example? But the undercurrent of life, there's always something unfolding, and they create an incident to be the distraction while something else prevails.
James Cameron, I'm sure you're very familiar with James Cameron.
No, James Cameron. He's also part of the Explorers Club as well too.
Oh, you know him?
So he actually, yeah, I know James Cameron, because on my particular dive in 2005, our dive was to recover two of these ROVs that were stuck. One was in a Marconi room, and the other one was in a Turkish baths. So we recovered two of these bots. They were worth about $250,000 each. So our expedition was to recover his bots, because James Cameron. The reason why I chose the Russian submersibles is because James Cameron used the Russian submersibles. Right. That opening sequence of Titanic that came out in 1998, that was the Russian submersibles. And Cameron went down 50 times. I went down twice. Cameron went down 50 times with the Russian submersibles. And that's why I went down with the Russian submersibles.
Yeah.
Because I know that guy is incredibly diligent.
And was it the people operating the Russian submersibles to put you in contact with the civilian cosmonaut program?
Yeah, so basically I knew people in the Shirshov Academy of Sciences, because at that particular point I was actually studying at the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City outside of Moscow, right? And so, it's a small network, and I actually got invited on that particular expedition in 2005, and I contributed as well too, and I gave him $30,000 in diesel fuel. So I paid for the diesel fuel.
Yeah, James Cameron said, we now have another wreck that is based on, he said this to the BBC, I think, we now have another wreck that's based on, unfortunately, the same principles of not hitting warnings, and he called it a terrible irony.
Captain Smith in 1912, basically, they warned him, listen, there's a lot of ice fields this year on this crossing you're about to make from Southampton to New York City, for example. And he said, fuck it, full steam ahead. In fact, the Titanic, Captain Smith, this was going to be his last voyage, and he wanted to go out with a world record with the fastest crossing. Was it hubris?
Yeah.
Cockiness, you know what I mean? And there was an ice field, but yet he told all his engineers, full steam ahead.
How do you think that this will impact the submersible? I'm going to say submersible industry, but obviously there's tourism with submersibles.
It's going to impact all sorts of things. Whether
exploration and tourism.
Just go to space, volcanoes, or this. There's going to be a lot more regulatory oversight, or an international body to cover international waters, because they're going to look at, okay, well, you can't do the dive unless you pass all these safety measures, for example. There will be a regulatory body, and I'm sure there's going to be like a coroner inquest, that type of situation that's going to unfold. And there's a gentleman by the name of Rob McCallum, and Rob McCallum basically runs a submersible business. And Rob McCallum basically told Stockton Rush of OceanGate, listen, with what you're doing, choosing the composite materials they're using to basically build your hull, there will be an accident and you're going to cause an injury and you're going to fuck it up for all of us. And this is 2018. This is 5 years prior.
Wow.
So Stockton was warned that he was building an experimental craft with 0 levels of compliance certification. And if things went wrong, he's going to blow it for everybody. In America, there's something called the NTSB, which is the National Transport Safety Board. There'll be one for the submersible industry, and there'll be one for space as well too. So it's going to happen. It's like anything. When one company fucks it up, they tend to fuck it up for everybody. But having said that, do I fear submersibles? No. In fact, there is a dive that I want to do probably in the next 24 months. The Titanic is about 13,000 feet. I want to go down to 37,000 feet to the Marianas Trench off the coast of Guam, which is the deepest
James
canyon.
Cameron do that?
Yes, he became
And
the
that was
second
built in
person to do
Australia,
so.
wasn't it?
And very good. It was Hawks Industries out of New South Wales, and so that particular submersible, which is pretty amazing. So James Cameron went down a couple of times, and I actually want to go down and do that dive into the Marianas Trench. It is 37,000 feet. It's astronomically deep. I mean, Titanic, 13,000.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
It's 3 times deeper. Yeah. So I still want to do that particular dive, regardless of what transpired last week.
That's what you've anticipated an answer to. One of my questions is, to what degree has the OceanGate adventure sort of impacted your perception of safety? And obviously, it's not stopping you because you're going deeper.
No, it's not, because I know the submersible they're using to go down to the Marianas Trench is a 7-inch thick acrylic biosphere. So acrylic or titanium steel is both used for an actual hull itself, for example. And I know the redundancies, and I know the development that the Australian team have basically built in relation to building the submersible that James Cameron used to go down the Marianas Trench. So I still want to do it. Now, mind you, that dive is very expensive. It's actually about $800,000 USD.
Wow.
And guess how many passengers? One.
Oh, really? How long does it take to get down that far?
6 hours.
How many people have done it?
7. And
hey, one thing I wanted to ask you: can you draw parallels between space travel and deep sea exploration?
Space travel is more safe.
Yeah.
And you can mount a rescue in space, which is a lot easier than mounting a rescue in the deep ocean. Isn't that fucking crazy? Apollo 13 in 19. Yeah, Jim Lovell's mission over here. They were in low Earth orbit, about 300 miles from the Earth, and they were stirring the cryo tanks, and something happened. It basically blew, and they lost all propulsion. And at that particular point, they had probably like less than 3% chance of surviving, because they'll be lost in space. So NASA engineers, they still have communications, they still have comms with Houston, and basically the engineers on Earth gave them a whole set of instructions, and they basically had enough propulsion to basically make it to the moon, slingshot around the moon, and then swing back to Earth. And they also had issues with carbon dioxide as well too. So they had to basically MacGyver a whole bunch of using manuals, paper, some old hoses to make scrubbers, so they can basically purge all the carbon dioxide, for example. And it was actually in the movie Apollo 13. But they brought the craft back, and they survived. This was the 1970s, like 20. So it's easier to bring a spacecraft back from space than to rescue a submersible in the deep ocean. And here's another thing too. We've only explored 3% of the world's ocean. We know more about space than our own ocean here on Earth.
When you went down to the Titanic, What was the thing that you went, oh my God, I didn't expect that? There must have been a few
Know
highlights.
what it was? The the amount of suitcases that were littered around the wreck. You know what? And the suitcases were made out of leather because leather does not decompose. Interesting, isn't it?
Oh, right.
And on top of that, there were so many shoes
Shoes.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once again, back in those days, shoes were made out of what?
Leather.
Leather. And leather does not decompose. So where there were shoes, there were human bodies.
That's chilling.
It is very surreal. And, there were two elements that I didn't expect. And we have manipulator arms, on our submersible, meaning we can pick up things, we can pick up plates. I mean, on my particular dive, I picked up some coal because
Ah,
basically it was coal powered,
yeah,
the
yeah, of course.
engines, for example, it was all coal powered, kind of
Yeah.
like the locomotives, right? I picked up some coal with my manipulator arm and I still have coal from the Titanic. How's that for a find? So we had our manipulator arms and we could pick up shit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there was one suitcase that I picked up. I didn't take it. I opened it up.
Wow.
I mean, it's like, it's a time capsule.
Mm.
It's just one of those things, Ben. But, well, look, enjoyed talking to you, my friend, about all this sort of...
I've got one last question. I remember you said to me a long time ago, the Russians have got the best technology. There's two in Russia. There's maybe one in Europe. And you said there's one in Japan, but the Japanese, it's not in their history books so much as it is ours. What do you think is the mystique that we have, for instance, about the Titanic that say the Japanese don't? Why are we so fascinated about the Titanic?
As it comes down to the explorers, I mean, most explorers, when you look at the history books, most explorers, we know the British have been explorers, right? The French exploration, Norwegians are renowned explorers, the Americans and the Canadians are renowned explorers, not just introspectively of their own respective country, but the world.
Yeah, true.
It's usually those five countries. Those five countries have done more for exploration than the collaborative effort of all the other countries on the planet.
Yeah.
My world exploration here.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So you're saying it's not so much about the Titanic, it's just the inherent nature of a lot of people in the Western world to be adventurers, explorers, the natural curiosity
Absolutely.
over and above. Oh, interesting. That
Absolutely.
wasn't the answer I was
Yeah, and
expecting.
when it comes to like technology and personal pursuits, Australia and New Zealand is also up there too. And these are individuals from, if you had those five countries from the engineering side and the individual pursuit of Australians and New Zealanders, for example, those 7 countries represent the highest per capita passport ownership in the world and travel as well too. Interesting, isn't it?
Well, I think we might wrap it up there. Thank you very much for joining me. That was just mind-blowing, some of those things. As I said, I've been captivated. I've been a little bit addicted to watching a lot of YouTube clips and things, and I haven't heard a lot of what you said in any of them. So this is quite shocking as we're going along. I was kind of like trying to catch my train of thought because I was blown away so many times. So thanks for your time.
There's a lot there too, and it's going to unfold. And like I said, just it's the pursuit of basically living life on the edge, for example, being an outlier, for example, and also being a contrarian. But it also comes with risks, and individual results may vary. But dude, Ben, appreciate your time.
Nik
And
Halik, thank you.
for your time. And thank you, sir. Cheers.
See you.